And welcome in here to Live Now from Fox. The Senate has passed a test vote on a war powers resolution that would block U.S. forces in Venezuela. This happening moments ago here, and I wanted to share this on your screen. This is from reporter Cami Mondo saying the Senate passed that war power resolution to rein in President Trump's military authority in Venezuela. That vote 52-47. 5 Republicans voting in favor, and going on to list the names there: Paul, Collins, Murkowski, Hawley, and Young. Now, we do have other lawmaker reaction coming in here. This is from Ruben Gallego, saying the Senate is passing a resolution to block Trump's unauthorized war in Venezuela. The Senate has made it clear we will not send our young men and women off to war to line the pockets of big oil. Continuing with our lawmaker reaction here, I do believe we have some more coming in. This one from Senator Patty Murray saying the Senate just passed a bill to prevent war with Venezuela. Don't let anyone tell you this is just symbolic. We will keep pushing until it passes the House.
Listen up, folks. John speaking, everything just changed. Congress is in complete chaos as Trump faces unprecedented pushback over his Venezuela military intervention and constitutional overreach, with Democrats dusting off impeachment papers and Republicans publicly defecting. The Capitol is in crisis, and the walls are closing in. The central issue that sparked this explosive confrontation revolves around Trump's decision to launch military operations in Venezuela without seeking any form of congressional authorization. Venezuela, under the authoritarian rule of Nicolas Maduro, has long been a target of American foreign policy, with successive administrations attempting to dislodge the dictator through diplomatic pressure and economic sanctions.
And then we pushed to pass it with a veto-proof majority. No war, no occupation. So once again, Senate passing this test vote here. And I do want to take you out live right now to the Capitol in Washington, D.C. to just share a bit more. If you are just tuning into this breaking news on Live Now from Fox, the Senate just moments ago held a test vote and advanced a bipartisan resolution that would limit President Trump's ability to conduct further attacks against Venezuela. The War Powers Resolution requires President Trump to get congressional approval before striking Venezuela again, and it comes after the U.S. military captured the president of the South American country, Nicolas Maduro, in a surprise nighttime raid. And as President Trump's administration is seeking to control Venezuela's oil resources and its government, Democrats had failed to pass several such resolutions in previous months. Republican leaders have said they had no advance notification of the raid early morning on Saturday to seize Maduro and his wife, but mostly expressed satisfaction this week as top administration officials provided classified briefings on the operation.
But Trump decided to escalate dramatically, ordering military action on his own authority, completely bypassing the constitutional requirement that Congress must approve significant military engagements. He simply gave the order, directed the Pentagon to move forward, and expected everyone to fall in line like they always had before. This wasn't a limited operation with a clearly defined timeline. This was a substantial military intervention that could potentially draw the United States into a prolonged conflict in South America, and Trump didn't consult anyone. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't even offer a courtesy notification. He just acted like an absolute monarch exercising unilateral war-making authority.
Now, President Trump predicted that U.S. involvement with Venezuela could be a years-long venture rather than a short-term one. In those early hours of Saturday, U.S. forces arrested Nicolas Maduro in that overnight operation, and President Trump announced the move in a Truth Social post, saying that Maduro and his wife had been captured and flown out of the country. Now, following the operation in Venezuela, President Trump said the U.S. would run the South American nation without going into details about what that would entail. But the president told the New York Times yesterday that he anticipated the U.S. would be running Venezuela and extracting oil from its reserves for years following this operation. And Venezuela holds more than 300 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. That's nearly quadruple those of the United States. So President Trump announced on Tuesday as well that Venezuela would be turning over between 30 million and 50 million barrels of high quality sanctioned oil to the United States. He said the oil will be sold at market price, and he will control the proceeds to ensure it is used to benefit the people of Venezuela and the United States. The president also adding that the oil would be transported directly to unloading docks in the U.S. via storage ships.
The War Powers Resolution of 1973 exists precisely to prevent this kind of executive overreach. That law explicitly requires presidents to obtain congressional approval for military operations lasting more than 60 days, and it establishes clear procedures for presidential reporting to Congress about deployments. Trump flagrantly violated that law, and he didn't seem to care. But here's where it gets really interesting. Congress didn't just sit back and accept this brazen power grab. For the first time in Trump's second term, legislators actually stood up and said, enough is enough. Democrats immediately filed a War Powers resolution designed to restrict Trump's ability to expand the Venezuela operation without congressional sign-off.
Republicans in the Senate have killed a resolution that would have put limits on President Trump's ability to take action in Venezuela. 5 Republicans had broken rank last week to advance a war powers measure, many concerned about the possibility President Trump would order troops on the ground in Venezuela. One of those senators, Missouri's Josh Hawley, spoke before the vote about what changed his mind.
I've had multiple very substantive discussions on this issue over the last 5 days. And, what the administration told me all the time was, they said, we think that this ties our hands. And I said, my concern is ground troops in Venezuela without congressional authorization. And they said, well, we don't want to do that.
CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins me now. Nicole, how did this play out?
Well, it played out with the vice president, J.D. Vance, having to break a tie here. Obviously, this was a very close vote, and rightly so. Obviously, there were passions on both sides of this issue in terms of Senator Tim Kaine, the Virginia senator who introduced this resolution, who basically feels that, the president's powers need to be reined in here.
And crucially, 5 Republican senators broke ranks to support it. That's right, 5 Republican senators voted with Democrats to rein in their own president. Josh Hawley and Todd Young were among those who initially supported the measure, joining Democrats in what appeared to be a genuine bipartisan assertion of congressional authority. This moment was extraordinary because it demonstrated that even within Trump's own party, there were limits to what they would tolerate. Republican senators publicly rebuked Trump's war powers claims, agreeing with their Democratic colleagues that the Constitution requires congressional approval for military action. They argued that the founders created a system of checks and balances precisely to prevent any single branch from wielding unchecked power over matters of war and peace.
And that there should be congressional approval for any further military action. He also had the backing of Rand Paul, a Republican, and as you mentioned, 5 Republicans signed on just last week to procedurally advance this. But what we saw tonight was this point of order, if you will, to basically table or kill the measure. Republican leaders argued that because there are no troops on the ground in Venezuela, this really isn't as urgent a matter that needs to be taken up right away. And so basically they tried to deprivilege this resolution. And so that is the vote that we saw this evening with both Senators Hawley and Senator Todd Young, both who supported the efforts to advance this resolution, turn around today and vote to, in effect, kill it.
And Nicole, some Democrats are now calling for DHS Secretary Kristi Noem to face impeachment.
Yeah, that's right. This is a measure that was introduced by Illinois Congresswoman Robin Kelly, who put forth articles of impeachment today against Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem.
They pointed out that the War Powers Resolution isn't just some optional suggestion. It's the law of the land, and presidents don't get to ignore laws just because they disagree with them. The institutional guardrails appeared to be working for a brief, shining moment. Congress was actually pushing back against executive overreach, enforcing constitutional limits, and protecting its own authority. But then reality set in, and Trump did what Trump does best. He personally intervened to crush the rebellion, making phone calls to Republican senators, issuing threats, and using every ounce of leverage at his disposal to force them back into line. He promised to primary anyone who opposed him, threatening to destroy their political careers by supporting challengers in future elections. He reminded them that he remains the dominant force in the Republican Party, that his endorsement makes or breaks political campaigns, and that crossing him would have devastating consequences. The pressure campaign was relentless, and it worked. Hawley and Young, who had courageously voted for the War Powers Resolution just days earlier, flipped their positions. They voted to kill the resolution, effectively giving Trump everything he wanted. The rebellion was crushed. The institutional guardrails crumbled. Trump got his military operation without congressional approval, and the Constitution took another devastating blow. But here's what makes this story truly significant. It was close. The margin was narrow. The rebellion almost succeeded. Trump had to personally intervene, expending political capital and revealing his vulnerability in the process. The fact that 5 Republican senators initially broke ranks demonstrates that Trump's grip on Congress isn't as absolute as it appears. There are cracks forming in his coalition, fissures that could widen into full-blown fractures if the political winds shift. Republicans are getting concerned about how far Trump is willing to go, and some of them are starting to voice those concerns publicly. This isn't just Democrats complaining about Trump anymore. This is bipartisan concern about authoritarian overreach and constitutional violations. This is Republicans and Democrats standing together and telling the president that he's gone too far, that he can't just ignore the Constitution, that he has to work with Congress. And that bipartisan pushback is absolutely unprecedented in Trump's second term. For the first time, there are real consequences for his actions, real pushback against his power grabs, and real questions about whether the institutional guardrails can still function. The Venezuela episode has exposed Trump's fundamental vulnerability in ways that his previous controversies never quite managed to do. Sure, he's faced criticism before. He's weathered scandals, investigations, and even 2 impeachments. But this is different. This time, Republicans are publicly questioning his judgment. This time, there's genuine bipartisan alarm about his disregard for constitutional processes. This time, the institutional pushback has teeth. And Trump knows it. He sees the writing on the wall. He understands that if Democrats win control of Congress in the 2026 midterm elections, everything changes dramatically. The impeachment threat becomes real. The possibility of removal becomes tangible. His entire presidency hangs in the balance. And that's why he's absolutely freaking out right now. Democratic activists, progressive groups, and candidates are running explicitly on impeachment platforms. They're telling voters that the only way to hold Trump accountable is to give Democrats control of Congress. They're pointing to the Venezuela operation as evidence that Trump can't be trusted with unchecked power. They're highlighting his attacks on judges, his weaponization of federal law enforcement, and his increasingly authoritarian behavior as grounds for impeachment. Over 140 House members have already voted for articles of impeachment based on these very issues. There's already a solid foundation of support for impeachment within the Democratic Party. All that's missing is the votes to actually make it happen. And if Democrats win the House or the Senate in 2026, those votes will materialize quickly. Within days or weeks of taking power, Democrats could move to impeach Trump. And if they control the Senate as well, they could potentially convict and remove him from office. This is precisely what Trump is so terrified about. He knows that his behavior has been extreme. He knows that he's pushed the boundaries of presidential power further than any modern president. He knows that he's accumulated a long list of potential impeachment charges, from violating the War Powers Resolution to using federal law enforcement as a political weapon to attacking the independence of the judiciary. He knows that there's more than enough evidence to impeach him. The only thing protecting him right now is Republican control of Congress. The only thing preventing impeachment is the fact that Republicans hold the majority and are willing to shield him from accountability. And that's a terrifying position for any president, knowing that you're only safe because your party controls the legislature and that everything could fall apart if you lose that protection. Trump is openly admitting this vulnerability. He's telling Republican senators that they absolutely must win the midterms because if they don't, Democrats are going to impeach him. He's making explicit what everyone already suspected, that he's only as safe as his party's congressional majority. He's basically running his entire re-election campaign and his midterm strategy on the fear of impeachment, telling voters that their ballots will determine whether he remains in office or gets removed. Vote Republican, he's saying, or I'll be impeached. Vote Republican, or the Democrats will destroy everything we've built. Vote Republican, or I'm finished. That's not the message of a confident leader who believes in the strength of his position. That's the desperate plea of someone who knows he's vulnerable, someone who understands that he's skating on thin ice, someone who realizes that the only thing standing between him and removal is the outcome of the next election. And the irony is absolutely staggering. Trump is effectively admitting that his behavior is so bad that if Democrats gain power, they're going to come after him. He's acknowledging that he's done things that could justify impeachment. He's confessing that his actions have been so extreme, so constitutionally problematic, so legally questionable that Democrats would have legitimate grounds to remove him. He's basically saying, if you don't keep Republicans in power, I'm going to be impeached and I deserve it. Of course, he would never put it that way, but that's the implicit message. He's admitting his vulnerability. He's conceding that he's done things that would trigger impeachment proceedings. He's revealing that he's not confident he could survive an impeachment trial with a Democratic-controlled Senate. And that admission is politically devastating because it undermines his entire narrative of strength and invincibility. The Venezuela situation has become a perfect illustration of Trump's fundamental weakness. He launched a military operation without congressional approval, violating the War Powers Resolution and the Constitution. Congress tried to stop him with bipartisan support. He had to personally intervene with threats and pressure to get Republicans to back down. He barely succeeded, and only by expending enormous political capital. The entire episode demonstrates that his power is limited, that Congress can push back, that there are institutional guardrails that still function, however imperfectly. And it demonstrates that his hold on his own party is less secure than it appears. 5 Republicans broke ranks initially, and that number could grow if conditions change. If Democrats win the midterms, those 5 could become 10 or 20, or enough to make impeachment and removal a reality. This is why Trump is so desperate to win the midterms. This is why he's pouring so much energy into Republican turnout operations. This is why he's threatening and cajoling and promising and pleading with Republican voters. He knows that his entire presidency depends on maintaining congressional control. He knows that the moment Democrats take over, he's facing impeachment proceedings that could actually succeed. He knows that his survival hinges entirely on the outcome of the 2026 elections. And that desperate vulnerability is driving everything he does, shaping his strategy, determining his priorities, and fundamentally altering the dynamics of his presidency. The impeachment threat is genuinely real. Progressive organizations are running full-scale campaigns to build public support for impeachment. Democratic candidates are making impeachment a central part of their platforms, telling voters that they need to elect Democrats who will hold Trump accountable. Democratic activists are demanding action, organizing protests, and pressuring their representatives to move forward with impeachment. The groundswell of support for impeachment is building, and it could become overwhelming if Democrats take control. Trump understands this perfectly. He sees the polls showing that a significant portion of the public supports impeachment. He sees the energy among Democratic activists. He sees the determination of progressive organizations, and he's genuinely scared. He should be scared because the consequences of impeachment would be devastating. Even if he survived a Senate trial, the process would be humiliating and politically damaging. The hearings would expose his misconduct in excruciating detail. The media coverage would be relentless, the damage to his reputation would be permanent, and if he actually got convicted and removed from office, his presidency would end in disgrace. He would join the tiny handful of presidents who were removed from office. His legacy would be permanently tarnished. His political career would be effectively over. Everything he's built, everything he's accomplished, everything he's fought for would be destroyed by impeachment and removal. That's what's terrifying Trump right now. That's what's driving his desperate campaign to maintain Republican control. That's what's motivating his frantic efforts to win the midterms. He knows that his presidency hangs by a thread, and that thread is Republican control of Congress. He knows that if that thread breaks, everything falls apart. He knows that he's vulnerable, that he's exposed, that he's in serious danger. And he's trying to use that danger to motivate Republican voters, telling them that they're the only thing standing between him and impeachment, that their votes will determine whether he survives or falls. It's a powerful message, but it's also a message of weakness, a message of fear, a message of desperation that reveals more about Trump's actual situation than he'd ever want to admit. The 2026 midterm elections have become far more than just routine congressional contests. They've transformed into an existential battle for the soul of American democracy, a showdown that will determine whether Trump can continue his presidency or whether he'll be impeached and potentially removed. The stakes couldn't possibly be higher. On one side, Republicans are fighting to maintain their narrow majorities and shield Trump from accountability. On the other side, Democrats are fighting to take control and hold Trump responsible for his constitutional violations. And the outcome will fundamentally reshape the balance of power between the executive and legislative branches, determining whether Congress can effectively check presidential power or whether it becomes permanently subordinate to an increasingly authoritarian presidency. The Venezuela episode provided a crucial preview of what would happen if Democrats controlled Congress. When the War Powers Resolution initially passed with bipartisan support, it demonstrated that Congress could stand up to Trump. When Republicans later caved under pressure, it demonstrated why Democratic control is necessary. Without a Democratic majority, the institutional guardrails can't function effectively. Republicans will ultimately cave to Trump's pressure, protecting him from accountability and allowing him to continue violating the Constitution. But with a Democratic majority, the dynamics change entirely. Democrats wouldn't cave to Trump's threats. They would move forward with impeachment. They would investigate his misconduct. They would enforce the War Powers Resolution. They would hold him accountable for his actions. And they could potentially remove him from office. This is why the midterms are so crucial. This is why Trump is so focused on them. This is why he's telling voters that their ballots will determine whether he's impeached. He understands that the outcome of these elections will determine his political survival. If Republicans maintain control, he's safe, at least for now. He can continue acting however he wants, violating the Constitution, ignoring congressional authority, expanding executive power without limit. But if Democrats take control, everything changes. He'll face impeachment proceedings almost immediately. He'll face the prospect of removal from office. His presidency will be transformed from a march toward authoritarian consolidation into a desperate fight for political survival. And Trump's strategy for winning these elections reveals everything about his current situation. He's not running on his accomplishments because his accomplishments are controversial and divisive. He's not running on his policies because his policies are unpopular with large segments of the population. He's running on fear, the fear that if Republicans lose, he'll be impeached. He's running on anger, the anger that Democrats are trying to destroy his presidency. He's running on resentment, the resentment that the establishment is trying to remove a duly elected president. It's a classic Trump strategy, using fear and anger as political weapons, turning his vulnerability into a rallying cry, transforming his weakness into a source of strength. And it might actually work. Fear is a powerful motivator. The fear that Trump could be impeached might drive Republican voters to the polls in large numbers. The fear that Democrats would take control might overcome their reservations about Trump's behavior. The fear that their president could be removed might produce the turnout Republicans need to maintain their majorities. But there's a fundamental irony in Trump's strategy. By making impeachment the central issue of the midterms, he's acknowledging his vulnerability. By telling voters that he'll be impeached if Republicans lose, he's admitting that there are legitimate grounds for impeachment. By framing the election as a choice between protecting him and removing him, He's conceding that his actions have been constitutionally problematic. He's essentially saying, Democrats want to impeach me because I've done things that deserve impeachment. He would never phrase it that way, of course, but that's the logical implication of his argument. He's revealing his weakness, his fear, his desperate vulnerability. And that revelation could backfire. Some voters might decide that if Trump is so scared of impeachment, maybe he really has done something wrong. Some voters might decide that holding the president accountable is more important than protecting him from consequences. Some voters might decide that the rule of law matters more than partisan loyalty. The coming months will determine which way the country goes. Will voters choose to protect Trump from accountability, maintaining Republican control, and allowing him to continue his authoritarian drift? Or will voters choose to hold him accountable, giving Democrats control and setting the stage for impeachment proceedings? Will the institutional guardrails hold, or will they crumble entirely? Will the Constitution continue to function as a check on presidential power, or will it become a meaningless document that presidents can ignore with impunity? The answer to these questions will be decided in the 2026 midterm elections. The future of American democracy hangs in the balance. The Venezuela episode has shown that Congress can push back against Trump, but only with bipartisan support and only when the political winds are favorable. The episode has shown that Republicans can break ranks and vote against their president, but only when the pressure isn't too intense. The episode has shown that institutional guardrails can function, but they're fragile and easily bypassed. The episode has shown that Trump is vulnerable, that his power is limited, that his hold on Congress is less secure than it appears, and the episode has shown that impeachment is a real possibility if Democrats take control. All of these lessons will shape the political landscape as the midterm elections approach. All of these lessons will influence how voters think about their choices. All of these lessons will determine whether Trump survives or falls. The message is clear. The 2026 midterms are the most consequential elections in modern American history. They will determine whether Trump continues his presidency or faces impeachment. They will determine whether Congress can check executive power or whether it becomes subordinate to presidential authority. They will determine whether the Constitution still matters or whether it's become a dead letter. They will determine the future of American democracy itself. That's not hyperbole. That's not exaggerated rhetoric. That's the simple reality of the situation we face. Everything is at stake. Everything depends on the outcome. And the voters will decide. Trump is terrified because he understands what's at stake. He's desperate because he knows the odds aren't entirely in his favor. He's frantic because he realizes that his political survival depends on factors beyond his control. He can threaten, cajole, promise, and plead, but ultimately the decision rests with the American people. They will determine whether he remains in office or faces removal. They will determine whether the Constitution still functions or whether it's been permanently broken. They will determine whether the United States remains a democracy or slides into authoritarianism. It's an enormous responsibility, and Trump is panicking because he knows the outcome is uncertain. He knows he could lose everything. He knows his presidency could end in impeachment and removal, and that knowledge is absolutely terrifying him. Trump is scared and vulnerable, trying to weaponize his fear as a rallying cry because losing the midterms likely means impeachment and removal. The outcome will determine the future of American democracy, and everything is at stake.